Hello everyone, my name is Phoenix Rivera, and well, looking back, I was 31 when the universe decided to serve a dish best eaten cold. Right in the middle of a gymnasium smelling faintly of old sweat and regret, otherwise known as my high school reunion. It's funny, isn't it, how certain labels stick to you like cheap gum on a hot sidewalk? For me, it was always Phoenix the weird bookworm, or Phoenix who lives in the library. They weren't entirely wrong, but they missed the point spectacularly. They saw the books, the glasses, the quiet corner I always found, but they never saw the steel forging inside. Have you ever been so thoroughly underestimated by everyone, including your own family, that their eventual shock becomes a quiet little victory you savor? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And if you've ever felt like you had to fight tooth and nail for every scrap of recognition, or if you've ever known what it's like to have the people closest to you just not see you, go ahead and hit that like button. Maybe subscribe, because you're among friends here, people who get it. This is a story about that fight, about blurred lines between justice and, well, a little bit of karmic satisfaction. My childhood unfolded in a home where the volume was always turned up on my older sister, Stella. Stella was sunshine and popular opinion personified. She was the cheerleader, the prom queen nominee, the one whose laughter echoed, whose minor achievements were trumpeted like royal decrees. And me? I was the shadow in the corner with a book, my nose practically pressed against the pages. My world was built of words and whispered narratives, far grander and more exciting than the meticulously curated beige of our suburban life. My parents, bless their hearts, I think they genuinely tried in their own way, but their understanding of success was very traditional. My father, a man of routine and predictable outcomes, would often look at me, head tilted, a slight frown etching lines between his brows. "Phoenix, dear," he'd say, his voice gentle but firm, "another book? Don't you want to go out and play? Make some friends?" My mother was more direct. She'd sigh, a gusty sound full of unspoken anxieties for my future. "All those books, Phoenix. It's not healthy. You'll get eye strain. Boys don't like girls who are too smart, you know. You need to be more like Stella. Stella knows how to get along." Get along. That was the family motto, it seemed. Blend in. Don't make waves. My books were waves. My thoughts, often too complex or questioning for dinner table conversation, were practically tsunamis in their placid sea. I remember one parent-teacher conference in 5th grade. My teacher, Mr. Henderson, a kind man with flour-dusted glasses from his lunchtime baking hobby, had told my parents I had an exceptional mind and a rare grasp of complex concepts. I beamed, my small chest swelling with pride. Later that evening, I heard my mother on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Carol. "Mr. Henderson says Phoenix is smart," she'd said, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite decipher then, but now recognize as a strange mix of reluctant pride and genuine concern. "But Carol, what good is smart if she's so solitary? Stella, now Stella has friends. Stella will marry well." Marry well, that was the pinnacle apparently. My intellectual curiosity was a quirky, slightly inconvenient hobby, like collecting porcelain dolls that might creep people out. School wasn't much different. I was an easy target, the quiet girl with the second-hand clothes and the perpetually ink-stained fingers. Chad Thompson was the ringleader of my tormentors. Chad, with his too loud laugh, his swagger that was more about insecurity than confidence, and his coterie of sycophants who echoed his every jeer. "Hey, Bookworm," he'd bellow across the cafeteria. "Found any new spells in those dusty old things?" His laughter would follow, coarse and grating. My defense was to retreat further into my books, to build thicker walls. The librarians knew me by name. The library was my sanctuary, the Dewey Decimal System my secret code. My family's dismissal wasn't malicious, not in the way Chad's bullying was. It was more insidious, a slow, steady erosion of self. It was the constant comparisons to Stella, who was, in their eyes, the blueprint for a successful daughter. Stella's C in algebra was met with tutoring and encouragement. My A+ in advanced literature was met with, "That's nice, dear. Did you see Stella made the pep squad?" It was the subtle message that my path, my passions, were somehow less valid, less worthy of attention or investment. I wasn't asking for parades, just acknowledgement. A sense that they saw me, the real me, not just the inconveniently studious appendage to their ideal family picture. Those early years laid a foundation of feeling perpetually on the outside looking in, even within my own home. It was a quiet ache, a constant companion to the stories I devoured, stories where underdogs often found their strength, a trope I clung to with a fierce, unspoken hope. The real turning point, the moment the background hum of dismissal crescendoed into a deafening roar, came when I was 17, on the cusp of college applications. I'd spent years methodically researching, dreaming not just of college but of law school. The concept of justice, of order, of using words as weapons for good resonated deep within my bookish soul. I had my sights set on a prestigious out-of-state university with an excellent pre-law program. My grades were impeccable, my SAT scores were high, and I'd even managed to participate in the debate club, a terrifying but exhilarating experience that proved I could, in fact, speak in front of humans without spontaneously combusting. I remember laying out my carefully prepared application materials on the dining room table, my heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against my ribs. My father picked up the glossy brochure from the university, flipping through it with a cursory glance. Stella was chattering about her plans for senior prom, the color of her dress, the drama with her date. My mother was half listening to Stella, half absent-mindedly stirring her coffee. "This place looks expensive, Phoenix," Dad said, his brow furrowed in that familiar way. "And it's so far away. What about State U? It's a good school, and you could live at home." "But Dad," I began, my voice smaller than I wanted, "this university has one of the best pre-law tracks in the country, and I'm applying for scholarships, a lot of them." My mother finally turned her full attention from Stella's prom sagas. "Law school, Phoenix? Honey, that's such a demanding career, all that arguing. It's not very feminine. And the hours, you'll never have a family." There it was again, the end goal, the only one that seemed to matter. Stella, ever helpful, chimed in. "Yeah, Nix, why do you want to do something so boring and hard? I'm thinking of a business degree, fun, and you meet lots of people." She smiled brightly, genuinely puzzled by my bizarre aspirations. "It's not boring to me, Stella," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "It's important, and I think I could be good at it." My father sighed, placing the brochure back on the table with a distinct air of finality. "Phoenix, we just want you to be realistic. Stella's right, a business degree from State U, that's a solid, sensible path. Your sister needs our support to get set up there, you know, dorm fees, a new laptop. You've always been so independent, so resourceful. We know you'll figure something out." Figure something out. Those 3 words, they weren't a vote of confidence. They were an absolution of their responsibility, a dismissal of my dreams as something I'd eventually get over. That night, the full weight of their perception of me crashed down. I wasn't the capable, independent daughter. I was the one they didn't need to worry about because my ambitions were too outlandish to warrant serious investment, emotional or financial. The message was clear. Stella's conventional aspirations were a priority. My unconventional ones were my own problem. I retreated to my room, the brochures feeling like lead weights in my hands. The hurt was a physical thing, a knot in my chest so tight I could barely breathe. Tears, hot and angry, streamed down my face. Were they right? Was I being foolish? The doubt, a seed they'd planted long ago with their casual dismissals, began to sprout ugly, thorny vines in my mind. For a few bleak hours, I considered giving up, applying to State U, picking a sensible major, and resigning myself to the small beige box they envisioned for me. The despair was a thick, cloying fog. It whispered that I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of their belief. Later, I overheard them talking in the kitchen, their voices low but carrying through the thin walls. "She's just going through a phase," my mother said. "She'll come around. Law school, honestly. Where does she get these ideas?" "She's always been a bit different," Dad replied, a note of resignation in his voice. "Let her apply. She probably won't get in anyway, not to that fancy place. And if she does, she'll see how hard it is and come home. We just need to focus on getting Stella settled. Stella needs us." Their words, meant to reassure each other, were like knives twisting in my gut. They weren't just unsupportive, they were actively betting against me, assuming my failure as a foregone conclusion. It was the casual cruelty of it, the complete lack of faith, that stung the most. They saw my ambition not as a sign of strength, but as a flight of fancy, an inconvenient detour from the path they'd mentally paved for me. Their justification was always rooted in what they perceived as my inherent independence, which was really just a euphemism for their neglect. Because I was quiet, because I was self-sufficient out of necessity, they assumed I didn't need them, or perhaps didn't deserve the same level of support as Stella, whose needs were always louder, more visible, more aligned with their expectations. The injustice of it burned, a cold fire in my belly that would, eventually, fuel a resolve I didn't yet know I possessed. That night, curled up in my small bed, surrounded by the silent, steadfast companionship of my books, something shifted within me. The despair, so potent just hours before, began to recede, replaced by a nascent flicker of anger, then a stubborn ember of determination. Their words, "She probably won't get in anyway," echoed in my mind, not as a confirmation of my inadequacy, but as a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down. I sat up, the moonlight striping my worn quilt. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, a pale, tear-streaked face, big glasses, a determined set to my jaw I hadn't noticed before. And in that moment, a vow formed, silent but absolute. "I will show you," I thought, the words a fierce whisper in my soul. "I will show all of you." It wasn't about proving them wrong in a petty, spiteful way, not entirely. It was about proving to myself that I was right, that my dreams weren't foolish, that my path, however solitary, was valid. I would build my future with my own two hands, brick by painstaking brick, if I had to. Their dismissal, intended perhaps to guide me towards safety, instead became the catalyst for a quiet rebellion. The path that followed was anything but easy. The acceptance letter from my first-choice university arrived on a Tuesday morning. I found it in the mailbox, a thick, cream-colored envelope that felt impossibly heavy. I opened it with trembling fingers, my breath catching in my throat. Accepted, with a partial scholarship. Partial. The elation was quickly tempered by the daunting reality of the remaining tuition, room, and board. When I showed my parents, my mother smiled thinly. "Oh, Phoenix, that's ambitious. Are you sure you can manage?" My father grunted. "Well, don't expect us to mortgage the house for it." Stella's college fund is earmarked. There was no celebration, no shared joy, just a reassertion of their priorities. The message was, once again, crystal clear: "You're on your own." And I was. The next few years were a blur of relentless hard work. I took out student loans, the kind that hang over your head like a perpetual gray cloud. I worked 3 part-time jobs during my undergraduate years. I was a library assistant, of course, shelving books in the hushed quiet I loved, the scent of old paper a comforting balm. I was a waitress at a greasy diner near campus, slinging hash browns and coffee, my apron perpetually smelling of fried onions and stale dreams. My third job was tutoring underclassmen in English and history, sharing the knowledge I absorbed so eagerly. Sleep became a luxury. My diet consisted mainly of instant ramen, free crackers from the diner, and lukewarm coffee. Social life? That was a foreign concept, something I read about in the novels I occasionally had time for between shifts and study sessions. There were moments of profound loneliness, of bone-deep weariness, where I'd stare at a dense page of constitutional law theory at 2 in the morning, my eyes burning, and wonder if I was insane. The weight of my loans, the pressure to excel, the constant gnawing feeling of being adrift without a familial anchor, it was immense. I remember one particularly bleak winter evening, trudging back to my tiny, rented room after a grueling 12-hour shift followed by a 3-hour seminar. The heating in my building was notoriously unreliable, and my room was freezing. I had a major paper due, and my laptop, a sputtering secondhand machine, chose that moment to die. I sat on my lumpy mattress, wrapped in my only decent coat, and just cried. Not loudly, but with the quiet, desperate sobs of someone pushed to their absolute limit. The thought of calling home flickered, but I extinguished it immediately. What would I say, and what would they offer? More platitudes about sensible choices? More thinly veiled suggestions to come home and be like Stella? No, I would not give them the satisfaction. But amidst the struggle, glimmers of light appeared, often from unexpected quarters. Dr. Eleanor Vance, my political philosophy professor, was one such light. She was a formidable woman with a razor-sharp mind and eyes that seemed to see right through my carefully constructed defenses. She saw the potential I worked so hard to hide, perhaps because it felt too vulnerable to expose. After one particularly intense class discussion where I'd, much to my own surprise, passionately argued a complex point, she asked me to stay behind. "Miss Rivera," she'd said, her gaze direct but not unkind, "you have a remarkable intellect. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise, and more importantly, don't ever tell yourself otherwise." She became an informal mentor, guiding my academic choices, writing a stellar recommendation for law school, and, most importantly, offering the validation I craved and never received at home. Her belief in me was a lifeline. Then there was Maya, my roommate from sophomore year. Maya was everything I wasn't: loud, vibrant, effortlessly social, studying something wonderfully practical, like engineering. Yet we clicked. She saw my exhaustion, my ramen noodle dinners, my solitary weekends spent buried in books, and she didn't judge. Instead, she'd drag me out for cheap pizza occasionally, make me laugh, and fiercely defend me if anyone dared to make a snide comment about the quiet girl. "Phoenix is going to rule the world someday," she'd declare to anyone who'd listen, her loyalty fierce and unwavering. "You just watch." There was also my great-aunt Millie, my grandmother's eccentric, globe-trotting sister. She'd send me postcards from far-flung places, filled with spidery handwriting and even spittier encouragement. Occasionally, a $20 bill would be tucked inside, a small fortune to me then, always accompanied by a note. "For a good book or a decent meal, dear girl, keep your chin up. The best view comes after the hardest climb." Her unwavering, albeit distant, support was a quiet comfort. These small kindnesses, these pockets of belief, were oases in my desert of self-reliance. They fueled me, reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone, that my worth was seen, even if not by those whose validation I had once so desperately craved. Meanwhile, life for Stella, as relayed in my mother's weekly phone calls, which were 90% Stella-centric, unfolded like a charming, well-funded sitcom. Stella got a brand new convertible for her 21st birthday. Stella's graduation party was a lavish affair at a country club. Stella's first apartment was chic and subsidized by my parents. Stella's boss just loves her. Mom would gush, "She's already been promoted." Of course, her father put in a good word with his golf buddy, but Stella's such a people person they'd have seen her talent anyway. I'd listen, a polite "That's great, Mom," on my lips, while juggling my textbooks, my work schedule, and the ever-present anxiety about my loan payments. The contrast was stark, almost comical in its blatant favoritism. Stella's path was paved with parental support, encouragement, and financial backing. Mine was a steep, rocky climb I navigated alone, fueled by instant coffee and sheer grit. Their indifference to my struggles, juxtaposed with their effusive celebration of Stella's easily won successes, only solidified my resolve. It was no longer just about proving I could do it, it was about building a life so undeniably successful, so authentically mine, that their opinions would become irrelevant echoes from a distant, unlamented past. Each small victory, a good grade, a well-argued paper, a scholarship that eased the financial burden ever so slightly, was a silent testament to my perseverance. A step further away from the shadow they had tried to cast over me. Law school was another 3 years of grueling immersion. It was Socratic method nightmares, mountains of case law, and the constant, thrumming pressure of a highly competitive environment. Yet, for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged. The weird bookworm found her tribe among other intense, driven individuals who debated legal theory with the same passion I reserved for my favorite novels. I thrived. I made law review. I graduated summa cum laude. Each achievement was hard-won, a testament to those late nights and sacrifices. When I passed the bar exam on the first try with a score high enough to make even my most critical professors nod in approval, I called my parents. My mother answered. "Oh, Phoenix, that's wonderful, dear," she said, her voice slightly distracted. "Listen, can I call you back? Stella's here with the baby, and little Leo just said Grandma for the first time. It was so adorable, you should have seen it. Click." No questions about my score, no inquiry about my job prospects, just a swift pivot back to the Stella show. I remember staring at the silent phone, a hollow feeling in my chest despite the triumph of the bar exam results clutched in my hand. It was a familiar ache, duller now, but still present. Some things, I was learning, never changed. My first job was as a junior associate at a decent, if not top-tier, law firm. The hours were brutal, the pay barely enough to cover my loan repayments and the rent on a tiny studio apartment in a less than glamorous part of the city. But I was a lawyer. I, Phoenix Rivera, the girl who was told law was too demanding, not feminine, was arguing motions in court, drafting complex briefs, and slowly, steadily, building a reputation for meticulous preparation and sharp analysis. My family's awareness of my career remained comically vague. Phoenix is doing something with papers, I think? I once overheard my mother telling a relative at a family gathering, one of the rare ones I attended, usually feeling like an anthropologist observing a strange alien tribe, legal stuff. She seems to like it, though I do wish she'd find a nice young man and settle down. Stella's little Amelia is starting preschool, you know. Time flies. My accomplishments, the late nights, the stress, the intellectual rigor of my profession, all of it was reduced to legal stuff. Stella's children's milestones, however, were international news. The dismissal continued, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of our interactions. When I made partner at a surprisingly young age after leading a particularly complex and successful litigation, I sent them an announcement. My father's response was a brief email. "Good for you, Phoenix. Keep up the good work." No exclamation points, no phone call. It was the kind of acknowledgement you give a distant cousin for winning a local baking contest. I remember staring at his email, a wry smile playing on my lips. The old hurt was still there, a faint echo, but it was overshadowed now by a growing sense of my own worth, independent of their validation. Their willful ignorance had, in an ironic twist, freed me. I no longer yearned for their approval. I worked for myself, for the intellectual challenge, for the pursuit of justice that had captivated me all those years ago. Interestingly, it was Stella who began to show the first glimmers of something approaching understanding. Stella, now navigating the complexities of her own marriage, a demanding toddler, and a career that hadn't quite lived up to its initial parentally boosted promise, started calling me occasionally. Not for advice, not really, but just to talk. During one of these calls, after I'd briefly mentioned a challenging case I was working on, she'd paused. "Wow, Nix," she'd said, a note of uncharacteristic thoughtfulness in her voice. "That sounds really intense. I don't think I ever really got what you did." It wasn't a full-blown apology, or even a deep acknowledgement of past dismissals, but it was a crack in the wall of her long-held assumptions. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift. Perhaps seeing her own life not unfold as perfectly as the script had dictated gave her a new perspective on the effort it took to build something substantial from scratch, as I had. Then came the letter that would lead me, rather unexpectedly, to the federal bench. An older judge for whom I'd clerked years ago, someone who had become another of my quiet mentors, recommended me when a vacancy arose. The nomination process was rigorous, invasive, and utterly exhausting. Background checks, interviews, hearings. Through it all, I maintained a calm, professional demeanor, drawing on years of practice in masking my inner turmoil. My family was informed, of course. My mother's reaction was, "A judge? Oh, Phoenix, that sounds very serious. Will you have to wear one of those black robe things? Stella's thinking of redecorating her living room." She's looking at fabric swatches. The disconnect was almost breathtaking. I was on the verge of a lifetime appointment to one of the highest legal positions in the land, and she was more concerned with Stella's chintz. The confirmation came through. Judge Phoenix Rivera. It had a nice ring to it. I bought myself a new, impeccably tailored suit, not a robe, for the swearing-in ceremony. Aunt Millie, frail but still fiery, flew in for it, clutching my hand tightly, her eyes shining with pride. "I knew it, dear girl," she whispered. "I always knew it." Maya was there too, cheering loud enough for 3 people. My parents and Stella attended, of course. They sat in the front row, looking slightly bewildered, as if they'd wandered into the wrong play. My mother dabbed her eyes, probably more from the solemnity of the occasion than any deep understanding of what it represented for me. My father shook my hand afterwards, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Pride? Confusion? Regret? I couldn't tell. And honestly, by then, it didn't matter as much as it once would have. Life settled into a new rhythm. The weight of the robe was more than just fabric, it was the weight of responsibility, of decisions that profoundly impacted people's lives. I took it seriously. My courtroom was a place of order, of respect, of meticulous attention to law and fact. The weird bookworm now presided over complex federal cases, her quiet demeanor belying a sharp intellect and an unwavering commitment to justice. And then, the invitation arrived. A glossy, garishly colored postcard. Northwood High Class of 9-10-year reunion. Come relive the glory days. My first instinct was to toss it in the recycling bin. High school was hardly my glory days. It was a period of intense social awkwardness, quiet suffering, and fervent wishes for invisibility. Why on earth would I want to revisit that? But then, a strange curiosity bloomed. Who had these people become? Had Chad Thompson, my chief tormentor, evolved beyond his teenage thuggery? Had the popular girls who once looked through me as if I were made of glass, found happiness in their picture-perfect lives? I mentioned it to Maya over our weekly video call. You should go, she said immediately. Wear something fabulous. Walk in there like the conquering hero you are. Federal Judge Phoenix Rivera. Imagine their faces. I laughed. It's not about that, Maya. I don't need to prove anything to them. Maybe not, she conceded. But wouldn't it be just a little bit satisfying? A little bit, perhaps. More than that, though, was a sense of wanting to close a chapter, to see those ghosts of the past and realize they held no power over me anymore. I RSVP'd yes. I even heard through the alumni grapevine that Chad Thompson, now supposedly a successful entrepreneur, would be there, no doubt ready to hold court, just like old times. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. This could be interesting. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of timing. And I had a feeling the upcoming reunion might offer more than just stale punch and awkward small talk. It might just offer a moment of unexpected and very public reckoning. The night of the reunion arrived, draped in a late spring humidity that made my carefully chosen silk blouse cling uncomfortably. The Northwood High Gymnasium, a place I'd actively avoided for a decade, looked depressingly the same. Faded banners drooped from the rafters, the scent of industrial floor cleaner mingled with the aroma of cheap wine and catered mini-quitches. A tinny rendition of some forgotten 90s pop song blared from oversized speakers. It was a symphony of forced nostalgia. I'd driven myself, parking my modest but reliable sedan amongst the oversized SUVs and flashy sports cars that screamed, "Look at me, I made it." Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my blouse, adjusted the simple gold pendant Aunt Millie had given me upon my judicial appointment, and walked in. The initial wave of noise, laughter, and shouted greetings washed over me. Faces, some vaguely familiar, others completely blank, turned, assessed, and mostly dismissed me. To them, I was likely still Phoenix Rivera, the quiet girl, the bookworm, perhaps now a librarian or a high school English teacher. The irony was a private, delicious little secret. My parents and Stella were there. Mom had insisted. "It'll be fun, Phoenix, a chance to reconnect. Stella's going. All her old friends will be there." They were already ensconced with a group of Stella's former cheerleader friends, my mother beaming as Stella recounted some anecdote that had them all roaring with laughter. I gave a small wave in their direction, which my mother returned with a slightly strained smile before turning back to the adoring circle. Old habits, I supposed. I found a relatively quiet corner near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, observing. It was like watching a nature documentary about a species I vaguely recognized but no longer belonged to. The jocks, now slightly paunchy, still clumped together, reliving ancient football glories. The former queen bees buzzed with an air of brittle superiority, comparing engagement rings and vacation photos. And then there was Chad Thompson. Chad hadn't changed much, physically. He was thicker around the middle, his hair thinning slightly at the temples, but he possessed the same arrogant swagger, the same too-loud voice that set my teeth on edge even after all these years. He was holding court, a cheap beer in one hand, gesticulating wildly with the other, regaling a group of rapt listeners with tales of his business ventures. I caught snippets. Multi-level marketing goldmine, practically prints money, got a boat down in the Keys. It sounded suspect, vague, the kind of boasting that often masks a foundation of sand. He spotted me eventually. His eyes, small and assessing, swept over me. A smirk played on his lips. Well, well, well. He drawled, loud enough for his entourage to hear. If it isn't Bookworm Rivera, still hiding in corners, huh? Whatcha doing these days? Cataloging ancient scrolls for a living? His cronies snickered dutifully. I met his gaze, my expression calm, neutral. Something like that, Chad, I said quietly. My lack of reaction, my refusal to be baited, seemed to momentarily deflate him. He preferred his victims to squirm. Before he could rally with another barb, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. 2 uniformed police officers walked into the gymnasium. A hush fell over the crowd. The music suddenly seemed too loud, then was abruptly cut off. The officers weren't here for the nostalgia. They scanned the room, their expressions grim. One of them, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, spoke to a reunion organizer, who then pointed discreetly towards Chad Thompson's group. My heart gave an odd little flutter. This was unexpected. The officers approached Chad. His boisterous laughter died in his throat. His face, moments before ruddy with drink and self-importance, paled. Chadwick Thompson? One of the officers asked, his voice calm but firm, easily cutting through the sudden silence of the gym. Yeah? What's this about? Chad blustered, trying to maintain his bravado, but a tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. Sir, we have a report of a vehicle matching yours driving erratically. You're going to need to come with us. We also have a warrant for your arrest on outstanding charges. Outstanding charges? What charges? This is harassment, Chad sputtered, his voice rising in indignation. Gasps rippled through the gym. His adoring audience began to melt away, suddenly very interested in the cheese platter or the faded photos on the wall. One of his associates, a nervous-looking man in a shiny suit, muttered, Chad, maybe this isn't the best time to argue. I told you about those SEC filings, Chad. Another whispered frantically. I told you they were looking into your import-export business. The officer was already cuffing him. You have the right to remain silent. The familiar words of the Miranda warning echoed strangely in the festive, now decidedly unfestive, gymnasium. Chad, red-faced and sputtering, was led away. The doors closed behind them, leaving a stunned, gossiping silence. The party was well and truly over. The reunion organizer, flustered, tried to restart the music, but the mood was broken. People began to leave in droves, whispering excitedly. My parents and Stella approached me, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Phoenix, did you see that? Stella exclaimed. Chad Thompson, arrested, can you believe it? My mother shook her head. Always a troublemaker, that one. What on earth could he have done? One of Stella's friends, a woman named Tiffany, who I vaguely remembered as being particularly cutting in high school, turned to me. Phoenix, you're a lawyer, right? Or something like that? Do you know what kind of charges they mean? Outstanding charges sounds serious. Her tone was less dismissive than usual, tinged with a newfound, if opportunistic, respect. I took a slow sip of my water. The moment felt surreal, suspended. All those years of being the quiet observer, the one on the periphery. And now, the spotlight, however, inadvertently, had found me. I could have been vague. I could have demurred. But then, I thought of Chad's sneering face, his bookworm taunts. I thought of my parents' gentle dismissals, their well-meaning but soul-crushing lack of faith. I thought of the long, hard road I'd traveled, the sacrifices I'd made. And a profound, almost serene calmness settled over me. I looked at Tiffany, then let my gaze sweep over my family, over the remaining curious onlookers. Actually, I said, my voice even, clear, carrying easily in the suddenly quiet space. I'm a federal judge now. A few indrawn breaths. Stella's jaw literally dropped. My mother's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. And, as it happens, I continued, keeping my tone perfectly level, Mr. Thompson has a rather significant federal fraud trial scheduled. It's on my docket for next month. I'll be presiding. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a dust mote land on the polished gymnasium floor. Tiffany's mouth gaped. Stella looked like she'd seen a ghost. My father, who had been uncharacteristically silent, simply stared at me, his expression utterly dumbfounded. My mother looked faint. The full weight of my statement seemed to hang in the air, shimmering. The weird bookworm, the quiet girl who lived in libraries, the one they'd all underestimated, dismissed, or outright ignored. That girl was now going to sit in judgment of the former king of the high school, the bully whose downfall they had just witnessed. The delicious, understated irony of it was not lost on me, and judging by their stunned faces, it was not lost on them either. For the first time, perhaps ever, they saw me. Not the caricature they'd created, but the woman I had become, forged in fires they hadn't even bothered to notice. And in their shocked silence, I found a quiet, deeply satisfying vindication that no shouted argument or tearful confrontation could ever have achieved. The universe, indeed, had a remarkable sense of comedic timing. The immediate aftermath was illuminating. The ride home with my parents and Stella was conducted in a silence so thick you could have spread it on toast. Stella kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, a bewildered expression on her face. My mother seemed to be in a state of mild shock, occasionally murmuring things like, "A federal judge, my phoenix," as if testing out a foreign phrase. My father just stared out the window, lost in thoughts I couldn't begin to guess. When we got to their house, my mother finally found her voice. "Phoenix, dear," she began, her tone tentative, almost reverent, a tone I'd never heard from her before. "Why didn't you tell us more clearly about being a judge?" I looked at her, a small, wry smile playing on my lips. "Mom," I said gently, "I did tell you, several times. You were probably busy listening to Stella talk about her new curtains." The words weren't accusatory, just factual. A little barb, perhaps, but one she'd more than earned. She had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. Over the next few days, the calls started. Former classmates, people I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, suddenly remembered me fondly. "Phoenix, so great to see you at the reunion. We should totally catch up." Tiffany, Chad's former admirer, even sent me a friend request on social media, accompanied by a gushing message about how she always knew I was destined for great things. I politely ignored most of them. Their sudden interest felt as hollow as the gymnasium's echoes. The real vindication, however, came not from their belated, opportunistic fawning, but from the quiet shift in my family's perception. It wasn't just about the title, it was about the undeniable reality of my achievement, a reality they could no longer downplay or ignore. My work, previously some legal stuff, now had a name, a weight, a prestige they understood in terms they respected, authority. Chad Thompson's fall from grace was swift and public. His multi-level marketing goldmine turned out to be a classic Ponzi scheme, preying on vulnerable investors. The DUI was just the tip of the iceberg. As his fraud trial approached, the local news picked up on the delicious irony: former high school bully to be judged by former classmate he'd tormented. My chambers were careful to make no comment, of course. My personal history with the defendant was irrelevant to the due process he would receive in my courtroom. But I'm human. The knowledge that he knew that he would have to stand before me, address me as "Your Honor," there was a certain symmetrical justice to it that I allowed myself a small private moment to appreciate. My true allies, Aunt Millie and Maya, were ecstatic. Aunt Millie sent me a vintage gavel she'd found in an antique shop with a note, for dispensing justice with wisdom and perhaps a tiny, well-deserved smirk. "Love, Millie," Maya called me, screaming with delight. I told you you'd rule the world, or at least Chad Thompson's corner of it." Their genuine pride was worth more than all the surprised gasps at the reunion combined. Even some unexpected alliances began to form, or rather, solidify. My cousin Sarah, who had always been a quiet, observant presence in the family, sent me a long, thoughtful email. She confessed she'd always admired my determination from afar, even when the rest of the family seemed oblivious. "You were always the one who knew her own mind, Phoenix," she wrote. "I'm not surprised you've achieved so much. They just never knew how to appreciate a diamond when it wasn't handed to them on a velvet pillow." Her words meant a great deal. The family dynamics underwent a slow, sometimes awkward, recalibration. My mother started calling me more often, asking about my cases. In vague terms, of course. She still didn't quite grasp the details, but she tried. She'd pepper her conversation with phrases like, As a judge, Phoenix, you must see all sorts of things. It was her way of acknowledging my status, of trying to bridge the chasm of years of dismissal. Stella, too, seemed to view me with a newfound respect, bordering on awe. The tables had turned. I was no longer the shadowy, bookish outlier. I was Judge Rivera, a figure of authority and accomplishment. They began, tentatively, to seek my opinion on matters beyond which novel I was currently reading. It was a strange, disorienting shift. I didn't dictate new terms with grand pronouncements. I simply lived my life, and they had to adjust to the reality of who I had become. The power dynamic had irrevocably, and very quietly, tilted. Life, post-reunion, post-revelation, settled into a new kind of normal. My work on the bench continued, demanding and fulfilling. I found a deep satisfaction in the intellectual rigor, in the pursuit of fairness, in the quiet authority of my courtroom. The black robe was no longer just a garment, it was a symbol of the responsibility I carried, a responsibility I'd earned through years of relentless effort and unwavering self-belief. My personal life found its own quiet rhythm too. I had Maya, Aunt Millie, a small circle of trusted friends who knew the real Phoenix, not the title. I even adopted a rescue cat, a grumpy old tabby I named Blackstone, who judged everyone silently from his perch on my bookshelf, a kindred spirit. Chad Thompson's trial was, professionally speaking, just another case on my docket. I presided with the impartiality the position demanded. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts of fraud. Sentencing him was a somber duty, yet I couldn't deny the faint, distant echo of poetic justice. He had built his fleeting high school kingdom on intimidation and deceit. His adult life had apparently followed the same blueprint, and now he faced the consequences. As I read the sentence, his eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was no arrogance left, only a dawning, desperate understanding. He was no longer Chad, the high school bully. He was Defendant Thompson, his fate sealed by the very system of laws he had so blithely disregarded. My relationship with my parents and Stella evolved into something different. It wasn't the warm, unconditionally supportive bond I might have craved as a child, but it was based on a more realistic footing. The dismissiveness was gone, replaced by a sometimes awkward respect. My mother still talked mostly about Stella's children, but now she'd also ask, "And how are things at the courthouse, dear?" With genuine, if somewhat odd, curiosity. Stella and I found a more adult connection. She'd occasionally call for actual advice, not just to fill me in on her life. She even admitted once, during a rare quiet moment, "You know, Nix, I was always a little jealous of how smart you were, how you always knew what you wanted. I just didn't get it back then." It wasn't an apology for the years of being the favored one, but it was an acknowledgement, a small bridge across the chasm of our different paths. I accepted it for what it was. We would never be close in the way some sisters are, but there was a truce, a recognition of shared history, even if our interpretations of that history differed wildly. Looking back on that whole journey, from the quiet girl in the library to the woman in the judge's robes, the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or even about proving people wrong. It was about self-worth. It was about understanding that my value wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval. Not my family's, not my classmates, not society's. It was inherent. My passions, my intellect, my quiet determination, those were my strengths, not my oddities. The world might try to fit you into a convenient box, label you, and dismiss you if you don't conform. But true strength lies in defining yourself, in pursuing your own path with integrity and perseverance, regardless of the noise from the cheap seats. Being underestimated, I discovered, can be a peculiar kind of superpower. When no one expects much from you, you're free to build your empire in silence, brick by painstaking brick, until one day they look up and wonder how that magnificent structure got there. The satisfaction isn't in their shock, though that can be an amusing footnote, but in the quiet knowledge of what you've built, what you've overcome. Family, I also learned, isn't always about blood. It's about who sees you, who believes in you, who stands by you when the world tries to tear you down. It's about the Aunt Millies and the Mayas who offer lifelines of support and cheer you on, even when you can't hear them over the roar of your own doubts. So, to all of you watching, if you've ever felt like the weird bookworm, the outsider, the one whose dreams were too big or too strange for others to comprehend, I see you. Don't let their limited vision define your horizon. Your journey is yours alone. Embrace your quirks, nurture your passions, and build your own damn empire. The most important validation you will ever receive is the one that comes from within, from knowing you stayed true to yourself, fought your battles, and emerged stronger, wiser, and undeniably you. Thank you for listening to my story. If any of this resonated with you, if you've walked a similar path, please share your experiences in the comments below. I genuinely love to hear them. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found some inspiration or even just a bit of satisfaction in how things turned out. And please, subscribe for more stories about overcoming, about finding your strength, and about the unexpected ways life can deliver justice. Remember, your value is inherent, your path is valid, and sometimes the best view truly does come after the hardest climb. Never, ever let anyone dim your shine.